שבוע טוב, בוקר טוב. We are taking a break from our regular learning about the great rabbis and their Torah, and we've reached the 80th century, but now we are going back in our time capsule. So we are going back to the 1st century and to the destruction of the temple, to the year 70. And we want to speak about a certain rabbi, a certain hero, in many senses, of the destruction, and that is Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. It is impossible for us to draw a full biography of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas because we just have almost no details about him. He's mentioned a few times in the literature of Chazal, of our sages. There are two stories that are directly connected to the destruction of the temple, and a third story, which is not a story, which is more of a halachic opinion, but that was connected by the sages again to the destruction of the temple. That's what we have about Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. As I will mention later, it also may be that we have some very little historical detail about him from Josephus, from Yosef ben Matityahu. That is, if we assume that we can identify the person that Chazal speak about as Rabbi Zechariah ben Avikulas with the person that Yosef ben Matityahu speak about. So let's begin and dive into the material. So the most known story is in גיטין, Nun Hey Amud Bet, Nun Vav Amud Aleph. It's the famous story of the destruction of the temple, known as the story of Kמצא and Bar Kמצא. And the story is that there was a certain man in Yerushalaim, as it will be clear in a few minutes. Obviously, he was a rich and powerful man, and he is throwing a party. He's making a dinner. He's doing a wedding. It's some type of a seudah, of a meal. We are not sure what exactly was the setting. And he invites many people, the most important people of Yerushalayim, the rabbis, the sages, the rich people. And he also wants to invite a friend of his named Kמצא. However, the shamash, meaning the helper, the aide of this man, the owner of the party, is by accident, instead of inviting Kמצא, he invites Bar Kמצא. So instead of Goldstein, he invites Goldberg. It's something like a very small minor mistake. And the wrong person comes Bar Kמצא. Now, Bar Kמצא is not only not the man that the owner of the party wanted to see there, he, again, by accident, is also a personal enemy of the owner of the party. So when the owner of the party sees him eating there, he says to him, you know, you and I are not friends. Now, it seems that he waits for a second, that he hopes that Bar Kמצא would get the message and just leave. Bar Kמצא does not get the message. And then he says to him, go out, without the please. Go out. Bar Kמצא tries to prevent the shame of being thrown from the party with everyone that is someone intending. So he says to the owner of the party, he says, you know, I would pay for my food, just let me be. The owner says to him, no, you are going out. And then he says to him, I would pay for half of the dinner. Says, no, I would pay for the whole event, which obviously was very expensive. Says the owner, no, and then he doesn't wait for the continuation of the give and take. He just take him by the arm and throw him outside with everyone seeing that and no one saying a word. No one saying a word. And this guy, Bar Kמצא, decides that he would get his revenge on the sages that sat there and didn't say a word. He understood, so to speak, the owner of the party that threw him away. After all, they were enemies. That was something that he could understood. But everyone just sitting there quiet and still, that was something that he could not take. So he decided to take revenge in the sages. I don't think that he was able to anticipate everything that would later come out of his next actions. But what he did was he went to the Caesar or to his local government, and he said to him, you know, I know that the Jews are planning a revolt. Now, that is a complicated sentence because that was a sentence that was always half right. Meaning there were always some Jews that were planning a revolt. That's just the historical background of the whole first century and the century before. So you can always point at someone and say that the Jews are planning a revolt. The Caesar says to him, how can I know that you are right? And Bar-Kamsa says to him, you know what, send with me a sacrifice to the Beit HaMikdash, and let's see if they would sacrifice your korban. If they will, then I'm wrong. But if they would reject your korban, that would mean that they are in open revolt with you. And the Caesar accepts this test and sends Bar-Kamsa with a korban to the Beit HaMikdash. And now we meet our hero. Bar-Kamsa comes to the Beit HaMikdash with the korban and with another small add-on. And that is that he put a blemish on the cow that he brought. So either a small injury in the lips or in the eyes. What is important is that it is a very minor thing. It is something that by the standards of the Romans was not considered to be a problem. Meaning they didn't see it as a blemish that would, a mum that would prevent the sacrifice. While for the Jews, it was considered a pasul, inappropriate to be sacrificed. And it comes with this korban. And the Chachamim there debate what should they do. Obviously, it's very dangerous because if you refuse to sacrifice the cow sent by the Caesar, then you are in type of an open revolt. On the other hand, would you sacrifice something that is asked to be sacrificed? So in the beginning, they wanted to sacrifice. Why? Because the Gemara says of Shlom Malchut, meaning to keep peace with the kingship, which can be just explained as pikuach nefesh. Right? This is pikuach nefesh. It's a danger not to one man's life, it's a danger to the whole Jewish nation. So they thought that they should sacrifice the korban with the blemish, with everything. However, there was a certain guy there, Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. And he seems to be a very important man because his words won the day. And he said, no, you cannot sacrifice a korban with an injury. Why? Because even if it's justified to sacrifice it now because of the situation with the king, but people would learn from it. And from now on, everyone would bring all of their injured animals to the Beit HaMikdash. So we must not do so. And so they didn't sacrifice. And then they said, okay, so at least let us kill Bar-Kamsa to prevent him from going back to the Caesar and telling on us. Now, I'm not sure what was their plan. I mean, the Caesar would just forget that he sent someone with a korban. Maybe they would somehow stage it to be natural, and then they would send someone to the Caesar saying that unfortunately your messenger died. I'm not sure what exactly was the plan, but they said let's take care of Bar-Kamsa. And again, Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas intervened and said, no, if we would now, even if it is justified to kill him because he is what we call a moser, so he is someone that is moser means that he is giving giving a bad name on the Jews in front of the Gentile king. And that is something that was extremely dangerous then and now, and is considered as type of a rodef. Now, again, that's a halachic term. A rodef, a pursuer, is someone that pursue with a knife, right? So if I'm just looking here at the street and I am seeing someone in a chase holding a knife or a gun, and there is someone else running away, I do not wait for a גיטין to give me permission to stop the chaser, to stop the pursuer, right? I can injure him or even kill him in order to prevent him from murdering someone else. Now, בר קמצא is a type of a moser, of a pursuer. Why? Because he is pursuing the whole of the Jewish nation. He's putting them in danger. So you are allowed to kill him in order to defend the Jewish nation. But again, Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas was not, he was not letting them to do so. He told them, if you would kill him, people would think that you are allowed to kill everyone that belmish a korban, a sacrifice. And again, that is wrong. So even if it is correct for this situation, in looking for in a long range, that would be a mistake. Now, it is unclear. Some of the Mefarshim say that Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas seemed to have been the head of the sages, the head of the Sanhedrin, because otherwise, why would his opinion be accepted every time? I do believe that he was a Kohen, and that in Beit HaMikdash, the decisions were led by the Kohanim and not necessarily by the sages. And he seemed to have been, I don't know if it was the Kohen Gadol, or he was the learned Kohen, the scholared Kohen. So his words were accepted. Now, as I said, we have in Yosef ben Matityahu, which I don't think I have to introduce here. Right, so Yosef ben Matityahu was a Kohen himself. He was the head of the defense of the Jews in the Galil in the Great Revolt against the Romans. And he capitulated in Yudfat. He surrendered himself we cannot go now into Yosef ben Matityahu, but in a very suspicious circumstances, he surrendered himself to the Romans, and then he became the historian of the war of the Jews against the Romans, which is also the name of the book. Later he became a historian. He wrote a history of the whole Jewish nation, קדמוניות היהודים. And now the Jews saw him as a traitor. The Jews saw him as a traitor, which I dare say that he more or less was. And he himself saw himself as trying to preserve. He was sure that Judaism is going to the trash can of the history. And he said, I want to preserve something. If I would be killed, what use it would be? So let me at least preserve the remnants, build a beautiful museum to Jewishness. Okay, so he is where he is, and we are where we are. So he was adopted, really adopted by Aspasianus, and later by Titus, and became Plavius. That's the name. That is the name of Titus. So he received their family name. So he was adopted, and obviously his history should be looked with understanding that everything he writes about the Romans may be tainted. After saying all of that, we usually accept that what he writes about the Jews, unless these are personal enemies of his, is more or less accurate. In many places, he is also correlated with what we are being told by Chazal, and there is no other source. So because of all of these reasons, we do use him a lot. He was not preserved in Hebrew. We are not sure if he wrote in Hebrew. He knew Hebrew for sure, but we are not sure if he wrote in Hebrew. He was not preserved. As I said, the Jews saw him as a traitor and didn't see any reason to preserve his writings. His writings were preserved by the church in Greek, and that's how they came back to us and are retranslated into Hebrew. And so after all of this long introduction, he has a certain Kohen in his book named Zechariah Ben Avikulas. Now, it is very difficult because of the translation from Greek to Hebrew and again to Hebrew. It is doubtful. Meaning, to us, at least to me as a layman, it sounds as a certain positive identification, right? Avukilas, pay and bet can easily change, and Zechariah Ben Avikulas and Avukilas seems to be almost certain the same man, especially that Yosef ben Matityahu gives a testimony that this Zechariah ben Avikulas was a pious Kohen, and he was the one that refused the korban of the Caesar to be sacrificed. According to Josephus, it was because of his extremism. He was a Kanai, and that's why he refused to sacrifice the sacrifice of the Caesar. We can see that according to our tradition, there may have been other reasons, but it may be that Yosef just didn't know. Meaning he was already out of Yerushalaim at that time of the revolt. He knew that there was a certain Kohen that refused the sacrificing and assumed that that was the reason. That's my, everything I'm saying now obviously is my speculation, right? It's my interpretation. But the real reasons are given by the people that were inside Yerushalayim, who are the sages. Okay, so that is, so that's why I assume that he was a Kohen. Meaning if it is right to identify Zechariah Ben Avikulas with Zechariah Ben Avikulas in Josephus, which as I said is very doubtful, and there are very scholarly articles that are written on the subject, and as my knowledge in Greek is zero, I have nothing to contribute to the debate. I can only say that there is a debate, and if it is correct that it's the same person, then it would be, I think it makes sense that he was a Kohen, and that's why his opinion was taken so greatly into account.
Have there not been a moon put here?
Yes.
From the emperor?
Yes, it says by Shlomo HaMelech, when Shlomo HaMelech sanctifies the Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash, he says explicitly that we would accept korbanot from non-Jews. The only thing is that non-Jews are only allowed to bring olot, and Jews are also allowed to bring shlamim. But the Caesar had no problem with us taking it as an ola, right, as a complete sacrifice, that everything is burnt. So that was, and they were sacrificing for the Caesar for years, and that was but because of the mum, they refused. Now the Gemara concludes. If you look at source Aleph, the last 3 lines, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in vetanuto shel Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, החריבה את ביתנו, שרפה את היכלנו, והגליתנו מארצנו. So Rabbi Yochanan puts more or less all the blame of the destruction. He says the humbleness of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas had destroyed our home, burned our temple, and exiled us from our land. So that's a very serious conviction, right? It's a very serious ha'ashama, conviction, right? That is being put to the door of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. Humbleness, ein vetanuto, anava. Yeah, the humbleness of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. And again, humbleness is usually seen by us as a very good trait, right? Rambam says in all the traits, you need to take the golden mean. Don't be too extreme. So for example, don't be too courageous and don't be too frightful. You should be brave. Let's say that brave is the golden mean, right? Rambam says that the name is not important. Just understand that you shouldn't be on the extreme. Rambam says there are only 2 traits by which you should be extreme. One has to do with anger. You should always be peaceful. I don't know if peaceful is the right word, right? But always relaxed, never angry. Even if, let's say that you need to educate someone, a child, so you need to put an angry face. But excuse me, you should put an angry face, but do not really feel anger. That's what so that's one midah in which you should go to the extreme. The other midah in which you should go to the extreme, says Rambam, is anava. As the Mishnah in Avot says, Rabbi Levitas ish Yavne Omer, Rabbi Levitas, the man of Yavne says, מאוד מאוד הווי שפל רוח. Very much indeed, you should be of a low spirit. Of a low spirit, very humble. And Rambam says, yes, that's the greatest virtue of them all, that you should have no gava at all, no proud, no pride. Just be very, very low, very always humble, always accepting. And here we stand up and we say that the humbleness of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas is the cause to the destruction of the land, to the burning of the temple, and to the exile from Israel. So that's Rabbi Yochanan is firing all his ammunition, right, on Zechariah Ben Avikulas. And the question is, what was the mistake? Well, we know what were the consequences, right? Because they didn't sacrifice the korban, nor they harmed in any way בר קמצא. So the guy just went back to the Caesar and told him that the Jews are in open revolt. They do not sacrifice your korban. And then the Caesar came to punish the Jews, and the Jews did open a revolt because, as I said, it was not completely out of context. The Jews were always on a small fire. There was always a will to revolt against the Romans, and when the korban was not sacrificed and the Roman became to come with an army, it's very easy to see how it immediately was turned into an open revolt. So the inaction of Zechariah Ben Avikulas had caused, again, he had caused, if you want to blame בר קמצא, blame the Romans, blame the owner of the party. But Rabbi Yochanan is aiming all his arrows to Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. And we need to understand what was the mistake that Rabbi Yochanan is trying. Obviously, we're not speaking here about Rabbi Zechariah, right? Rabbi Zechariah. We are speaking about ourselves. And we are trying to learn the lessons that should be learned from what happened in the year of 70, in the summer of the year 70 in Yerushalaim. So what I would like to do in the second half of the show, after telling the story, is trying to see three different approaches in the Mefarshim to the mistake of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. One is the opinion of Rashi. You would see it in source Gimel here. And Rashi explains, what is invetanuto, right? The humbleness. So what humbleness do we speak here about? Says Rashi, invetanuto, savlanuto, his ability to suffer someone, or here to carry. סבלנותו, שסבל את זה ולא הרגו. So according to Rashi, what was the right solution that they should have taken? The right solution was to kill בר קמצא, not to sacrifice the korban. Because today you sacrifice the korban, tomorrow you would come up with a new invention. There would be no end to it. So you must put the issue to rest. Right? So you must put בר קמצא to the sword. That was, according to Rashi, the right solution. And Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, by not doing so, but by being savlan, willing to suffer or to accept the words of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, the words of בר קמצא and the acts of בר קמצא, and having mercy on him, maybe, that was what caused the destruction of Yerushalayim. So the anava here is in the sense that sometimes you need to take an extreme action. You cannot always be kind and nice and smiling, or it may be indifferent. Yeah, that's the strongest accusation. But you are right. You are right, and that's the accusation being said by Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel, who was better known as the Saba Mislovodka, the Slovodka Alter, and he was the head of Yeshivat Slovodka that later came to Eretz Israel and became Yeshivat Hebron, nowadays in Yerushalayim, in Givat Mordechai, and he wrote that the problem was that Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas was a very nice guy and intelligent, and he was saying intelligent things, right? Very smart, he was looking ahead. But the problem was that he was not caring enough about what was going to happen. So he was sitting in the ivory tower, right, and giving scholarly interpretations of halacha and analysis of what may happen if we would do X or we would do Y. But the ground was burning. And sometimes you cannot just sit and look from afar. You need to go down and do what is needed to be done.
Work with to be humble, always humble.
So you understand that humbleness here is just sitting quiet, not taking action. Yeah, and it may be being indifferent, because sometimes indifference is disguising himself as humbleness. Right? So I'm saying, yeah, you know what, I am, or being very, I would say today, open-minded, pluralistic. Right? So yeah, I am allowing everyone to do as he wants, and what a tzaddik am I, because I'm so open. But truth is, it's not openness, just indifference. It's not really important. If it was important to me, I would have. I mean, I'm looking for an example that would that would be natural. But if I am, let's say that someone is saying, I am so loving of my child that everything he eats is fine with me. I never say anything to him, and I am very open-minded. And we would say, you are crazy. You are indifferent to your child. That is not being called being open. That is being indifferent. And the same thing may be said maybe here about Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas sits, and he sits, in the air conditioner, right, in his office, and there are questions coming in. So there is an interesting question about a guy coming with a korban, and so what can we can kill him, or we can maybe sacrifice. And he says, no, both options are wrong. So what we should, I don't know. It is humbleness, right? Because in the end, he's not, is accept, yeah, okay, so whatever happens, happens. But sometimes whatever happens, happens means that the destruction of everything.
It means why, for me, it's very hard to understand. If you have some opinion, okay? Because like he had some, you don't know what's going to happen, but you have to stand up for your opinion. It means your humbleness, you wouldn't be humble, you wouldn't agree to everything, okay?
No, here he didn't agree to everything. He didn't agree for them to sacrifice. He didn't agree for them to kill Bar Kמצא.
Yes, but somebody.
But he didn't suggest anything else.
Action.
Yeah.
Some actions.
So that is being humble in the sense that I do not intervene. So he did not intervene, but the
difference in humble.
That's more indifference. Yeah. This is what David said.
Could be the opposite. What you've got with the sort of Kמצא bar Kמצא is you've got a very wealthy man who gives us the party, and the sages at the time didn't want to burn the bridges with the wealthy man. They were worried that maybe he was supporting them, supporting all the Torah, and they didn't want to cross him, and therefore they kept quiet. With Zechariah, it was maybe the opposite. He knew that he would destroy the relationship with the Romans, but felt he had to stand up and support the strict letter of the law with the korban. Maybe he was trying to undo the damage that the sages had done with Kמצא bar Kמצא. It's a different action.
It's a beautiful interpretation.
The two extremes led to the destruction together.
Yeah.
Maybe you have to find them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful interpretation. That's a beautiful interpretation. It's a slightly more difficult thing to put it squarely with humbleness and in vetanut, but it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful interpretation for sure. So anyway, that is the first direction, right? That he should have killed Bar Kמצא. He refrained from taking action, maybe because he was merciful, so he couldn't bring himself to putting a death sentence on a Jew. Maybe because he was indifferent, as you suggest. Maybe because he wanted to somehow undo the damage of the sages. Be it as it may, in the end, he was not willing to take the action of killing Bar Kמצא, which was the needed action. That's one approach. The second approach says, no, the right action was not to kill Bar Kמצא. The right action was to sacrifice the korban. He should have sacrificed the korban. And why did he refrain from sacrificing the korban? So the answer is that earlier I said that it's a case of pikuach nefesh. Now, that is not so accurate. The Gemara does not say pikuach nefesh. The Gemara says shlom malchut. What is the difference between pikuach nefesh and shlom malchut? The difference is the following. Pikuach nefesh is a direct situation of the clear and direct danger to human life. That is pikuach nefesh. So if I see someone that is sick and he needs an immediate medical treatment in order to prevent chas v'chayila a danger, that is pikuach nefesh. If a building collapses and there are people, or even maybe people under the debris, then I must, even on Shabbat, take out the debris, clear out the debris in order to see if I can save someone's life. That is pikuach nefesh. Shlom Malchut is different because the danger is not, the danger we may say is clear, but it is not direct. It's not because I do not sacrifice, this would kill people. What I need to do is to go into some type of a political calculation that if I would not sacrifice, then they would see it as a revolt. I won't be able to convince them otherwise, and then chas v'chayila, it may boil down to what it will. That requires not a decision of pikuach nefesh is up to each one of us, or even a small child. Anyone can decide that if it's now a pikuach nefesh, I break Shabbat, I break Yom Kippur, I break everything that needs to be broken. But when we speak about cases like Shlom Malchut, that's not a decision for everyone. That's a decision for the Beit Din, for the great court, the head court of the Jewish people. Because that's usually it's also not a question of great emergency. That is something that you can debate for a day, for a two. So you bring it to the head court and they make a decision. It seems that Zechariah Ben Avikulas, Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, was not willing to take the mantle of the great court, of the head of the great court, the Beit Din Gadol. Now he was. Otherwise, they would not defer to his opinion, or maybe it was the Kohen Gadol, but he was in the position that was supposed to give this decision that is out of the box, it is out of the line. I mean, in a very different settings, but just to give us some type of an example. So a few years ago, 32 years ago, when the Corona began, right? So just 2 weeks before they closed down all schools at the whole state, basically, I received a phone call from one of the doctors and the head of the kehila back then, and they told me that, you know, that there is this disease, this pandemic, and it's spreading very, very fast. So in order to prevent pikuach nefesh, we must close down the shul for Shabbat. Now, again, that was before the state decided to close everything. And this is a very difficult decision. There is one thing as a Rav, right? So I learned to be a Rav, and I got my smicha, and, you know, I can answer questions of Basar v'chalav, and questions of Yom Kippur, and questions of Shabbat, and okay, all of these are questions that I know how to look for, and they are in my area of expertise, quote unquote. Questions about closing down the shul because of a pandemic, right? These are completely beyond uncharted water, right? This is something that I was not prepared for in any sense, and not only because the halachic factors are difficult, which is part of that, but also because the magnitude of the decision. You do not become a Rav of a shul in order to close it. And I think, now again, I hope that I am not projecting for myself. I mean, obviously I do, but I hope that it's not completely out of context. But I think that's what was Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas in a much greater magnitude was feeling. I did not become the head of the Kohanim in order to bring in a Belmish sacrifice. That is out of what I'm willing to do. Now, it may be that you can convince me that in some halachic calculation I'm allowed to do so, but it was just, he couldn't step up to what the time required. I think that was what happened there. He was a great, he was a Talmid Chacham, and if nothing would have happened during his time as the Kohen, then, or as the Rosh Beit Din, no one would remember him either for too much, too good, or too bad. But what the time required, he was not able to provide. That happens from time to time. There sometimes are heads of states that they are neither here nor there, they are fine. And if nothing great happens, they would just finish their term and everything would be okay. But if there would be a war, or there would be something that would require a great leader, they would be exposed in their mediocrity. And that's, one can think, for example, about it was a very famous in Jewish history, the second Franz Joseph. It was the last ruler of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that's the 18th century. And that was a great place. It was a great state. He was a great ruler. By the way, he was very much liked by the Jews. My father, Zichrono Livracha, was still telling me stories that his parents were telling him from his grandparents about Francis. He was loved by the Jews because he was a very pluralistic, I mean, again, in the standards of the 18th century, but he was 19th century, but he was a very pluralistic man and they loved him. But he was mediocre in his abilities as a politician in the international stage. And after ruling for, I cannot remember, I think 50 or 60 years, for many, many years, he dragged himself into the First World War, which was a complete disaster. I mean, he opened the war, and the end outcome of the war, as I think you all know, was that the Austro-Hungarian Empire ceased to exist. Now, he didn't live to see it because, blissfully for him, he died from old age during the war. But that was a complete disastrous decision of his that was in no way forced on him. It was his own making, and it was and the whole preparation of the army, everything that he did was just mediocre. Now, as long as everything in Europe was more or less sticking, it was not so bad that he was a mediocre ruler. Things were going along. But when a great war opens, then someone like him is just cannot handle what is coming on. So that's just an example. Now again, lehavdil אלף אלפי הבדלות between all of these examples. I'm just giving them to illustrate. I'm trying to somehow give us a picture of what was going on there. I think that Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas in the end was not able to raise himself to the challenge that was demanded. And what was demanded was that you would sacrifice a Baal Mum Korban, according to the Marsha. But that was a decision that he couldn't take. Now, maybe what he should have was step down and let someone else do the dirty work if you are not able to do so. But he didn't do that as well. So that was a type of a humbleness, right? Of who am I? But who are you? You are the person that was put by the Ashkahya right now as the leader of Am Yisrael. And if you are not able to do the right decisions, then the outcome would be disaster. And that's what happened.
Yeah. It might be that he didn't realize the consequences of what he's going to do. Of course he didn't realize that. And also, you say, like, it's a huge criticize on the rabbi, he didn't decide what he should have. But I have an idea. Maybe every day someone would have come with this Bamish cow and say, I want to sacrifice this. I know I saw something in their eye, but it doesn't matter because the whole thing is okay. And he said, no, you cannot do that every single day. And then this guy comes from the Caesar. He cannot say do that because it's not only this thing. It's not that everything is okay and all of a sudden this, Bamish.
No, you're right. You're exactly right.
So maybe he did the right thing. Maybe like in all the calculation that he had in front of him, he realized that this is the right thing to do.
No, I'm sure that's what he realized.
Of course, it was not at the end, but
I think you just drew the right picture. That was that every day.
He knew that. Like he knew that he wouldn't let him do that. If he would think that the rabbi would let him do that, he would find something else. It's not that he did that. Oh, let's see if he will let me do that or not. It meant to be that way. So it's not fair. I feel to do because he did the right thing in the the picture that he saw.
No,
But
I think that because we have to blame someone. That's what
it's not correct. Why I think it's not correct? Because at that time, as you say, in this situation, Jews were always burning with Romans. It wasn't home in paradise.
Right.
Okay, it's always burning. And if I would bring some blemish cow, okay, I mean, who am I? But it's Caesar, and you as a person in charge has to realize we have situation right now. Lapid jumped to the conclusion, blames Russia. Now we have problem with Russia, and problem with Russia, hell with it. But we have Iran, we have Jews in Russia, Satnut gonna close. He as a head of, as a men in high position. It's not like laymen. If I can say it here, okay, I can say anything what I want. It doesn't affect. His saying affects nation. It's not affecting one person, you know, like or two persons. Affecting nations means you have to think about how your action can affect.
I think both of you are very right. I think that what we saw now is more or less the discussions that were held in the office of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas between the different factions. And Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, that's exactly what Nina says, is exactly what Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas said. You know, every day we are fighting here against people bringing in lousy korbans, and if you would accept that, then the whole line would collapse. But others said to him, but this is a very different situation. You need to rise to the challenge. And he was just not the man to be able to differentiate and to rise to the challenge. He was not. I mean, I apologize. I certainly not see myself in a position to criticize Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. I'm trying to explain what Rabbi Yochanan said. But in the end, that was a great mistake for which we paid dearly. Now, it would be ridiculous to think that only Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas was the only one that was wrong there, and everyone else was tzaddikim, and he is the only one to carry the blame. He is a representative of a whole society that was not able to raise to the challenge and collapsed.
I think also there's two different points here. One is whether they did the sacrifice, and then the other is what to do after they didn't do the sacrifice. And so like Rashi's complaining, saying it wasn't the sacrifice of not doing it that was the problem. It was what do we do after? Do we
how to
kill
fix
our
it?
Kמצא or suggest something else?
Yeah.
And he didn't do either of those.
Yeah.
So
Didn't put him in jail.
that could be where exactly. Put him in jail and send another messenger to
Right.
or something like that.
Say he's sick and just.
Yeah.
So a second, so as we saw up till now, two approaches, which each one of them we saw different nuances, but two approaches. One is the approach of why didn't he kill him, and that's the approach of Rashi, and that has to do with maybe indifference or maybe mercy, which are misplaced, etc. The second approach is the approach of Maharsha, saying why didn't he sacrifice the korban? And here we spoke about not being able to raise to the challenge. There is a third approach, and the third approach speaks not about what was the right option, but about what was he looking for? What was his considerations? Sometimes when we discuss moral decisions, sometimes we say what is the right decision. But sometimes there are situations in which maybe there is no right decision, but the real question is what are the considerations you are taking into account? We are seeing what is the nature of your morality by seeing what are your arguments, not only by seeing what is your end result. So if someone's argument is, for example, what will give me more benefit, then regardless of what is his end result, that's a very low type of moral reasoning. If someone moral reasoning is about the benefit of the group, then it's a higher moral reasoning. If someone's reasoning is by what is the right thing to do by itself, then that will be an even higher moral reasoning, etc., 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 etc. So, what were the arguments that Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas was taking into account? And in order to better understand, I would like to go to the only source about Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas that has nothing to do with, or at least in the beginning, has nothing to do with the Churban of Beit HaMikdash. And that is, if you would now skip to source Yud. בית הלל אומרים, מגביעים מעל השולחן עצמות וקליפין. So I eat on Shabbos. I hope you do as well. And after I eat, there are remnants. Right? There are the bones of, let's say, I ate the chicken, so there are bones. If I ate something else, there are klipot. Klipot are peels. Thank you. The peels. Now they are muktzeh because they are of no use. They are just garbage. So they are muktzeh. But on the other hand, now they're on my table, and it's not appropriate for Shabbat, that they will just remainder for the whole Shabbat. So what can I do? So according to Beit Hillel, I can just take them. מגביהין מעל השולחן עצמות וקליפין. I should remove them because it's inappropriate for Shabbat for them to stay. בית שמאי אומרים, מסלק את הטבלה כולה ומנערה. They said, no, it's inappropriate to take the muktzeh by hand, so take the whole table and throw it outside. I mean, not more, but shake it outside. Now we have to remember they didn't have big tables as we have. They had small trays to every person, individual trays. So take the tray, shake it outside, and bring it back in. That is Bet Shammai. Zechariah Ben Avikulas, here he re-emerges. Zechariah Ben Avikulas לא היה נוהג, לא כדברי בית שמאי ולא כדברי בית הלל, אלא נוטל ומשליך אחר המיטה. So Zechariah Ben Avikulas didn't want to do each, because he felt that it's too much. I mean, why to move a muktzeh even by the table? So what he was done, they were eating on their beds. So they were like in Lela Seder, right, that you are leaning. So they were eating on their beds. So instead of putting the bones on the table, he would turn his face to the wall and, spit the bones and the peels from behind his bed. And that way, he didn't need to move the muktzeh on Shabbat. Now that's amazing.
No, that's why they have to clean the basic very good.
Yeah. Now that is amazing. That is amazing. Why? Because that's a certain halachic position which we can analyze. But what is important is the next sentence in the Tosefta. Amar Rabbi Yosa, in vetanuto shel Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas, he sarfa et ההיכל. Why? Because he spat bones behind his bed? No. Obviously, there is something else here, right? According to Rabbi Yosa, there is a direct connection, a link between his inability to decide what to do with bar kamta and his sacrifice and what he was doing on Shabbat when he was spitting the bones behind the bed. Now, what is the link? What is the connection? I would like to suggest that the link that he sees, why we are all smiling when you hear on his solution? Because obviously that is a solution that takes into account only the halachic consideration of the muktzeh and completely miss the whole thing about in Shabbat you don't want to live in a garbage pool, right? You're spitting the bones and the peels behind the bed. How it would look in Motzei Shabbos? You eat the first meal and second meal and third. How it would look like?
Also in the meal.
And in the middle, it's shocking, right? And he was having a very narrow vision, right? A tunnel vision of his arguments and considerations. That was the main problem. If we look, you are now discussing the fate of the Jewish nation when you are talking about the question, should you sacrifice the korban of the Kesar? And what are your considerations? Shema Yomru, Shema Yomru. They would say like that, they would say like that. I would kill him, maybe other people would be, I would take the sacrifice, maybe other people would sacrifice. What about the immediate consideration of what would happen with the Roman Empire and the relationship with the Jewish nation? At least speak about it. You can, maybe if you want, you can even make a stand. I guess that if someone would pay for me, I can take the stance of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas and try to give it a reasonable argument. So I would say, you know what? A Beit HaMikdash in which people are being killed and in which korbanot with blemishes are being sacrificed is not worthy to exist. So it's better to risk its existence and not sacrifice the korban and not kill bar kids. I can understand such an argument. I wouldn't take it, but if that would be his argument, then fine. So he has a position, and okay, we can debate it. But you are not even taking into account the bigger question. You are completely only looking at the halachic question of sacrificing and of murdering. Important halachic question, no doubt. But you, not only that he didn't raise the challenge, he didn't even see the challenge. The challenge was somewhat behind his vision. And that is the most dangerous situation. Because if you cannot see it, then you cannot react to it.
That's very, very, you raise a very, very interesting point and very interesting. That halacha has to go with life. If halacha just for case of halacha, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the halacha lemaise, as we say, is the combination of how halacha, which is the ideal, interacts with the reality.
This contemporary reality.
Yeah, exactly. Now it doesn't mean that halacha should chas v'chayila always bent down. There should be an interaction, and we are hoping that halacha in the end would shape reality. But it can only shape reality if you know what reality is. If you completely ignore what is going on on the ground, then your decisions would be out of sync with what happened. That's what happened to Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. The problem, I think, was not only with the bottom line of his decision. That is the invetanuto. What is humbleness? What is wrong humbleness? Wrong humbleness is not understanding the greatness of yourself, of the outcome of your decisions, looking from only very limited scope. That is humbleness, a wrong type of humbleness. And that was, I think, in the end, so we had three approaches, but that's what I think is the best explanation for the way that Rabbi Yochanan puts it, that in vetanuto shel Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas. He was a man that, again, I'm sure that he was a great halachist. I'm sure that it was much better than I am. I mean, again, I am not in any position to criticize him, but trying to understand what Chazal are trying to teach us. What should we take as a lesson? That we must widen our vision. We must ask ourselves, we shouldn't be false humble. We should see our greatness in the sense, not that I'm great, but in the sense that a decision of mine is not only a decision to myself, and not only if I'm in a very high position, even if I'm a small man, but my decisions sometimes can have an effect on whole communities. And narrowing myself may lead chas v'chayila to destruction. So I would like to finish. With the Mesilat Yesharim in the last source in the page. So the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, who is from the 18th century. So we are returning in the end to somewhat of our regular learning. And in the 20th chapter of his Path of the Just, the Mesilat Yesharim, he speaks about Chassidut. And he doesn't speak about the Chassidut of Baal Shem Tov, we didn't know it. He speaks about Chassidut in the classical sense of someone that is a pious man. And he says sometimes piety is very wrong-headed. Why? When you take it in a narrow sense. So he says, for example, you would see someone making an avera, and you would begin to protest and to shout. But if you do not know the man, and you don't know, maybe you're protesting, maybe you're protesting, instead of returning him to the good path, would only reject him even farther away. So you think you are a pious man, right? Because you protest, what a tzaddik you are. But no, what you are doing is wrong, is just the opposite of being pious. Because you always must take into account, in order to be a real pious, you must take into account all the outcomes that may come in, according to human ability, all the outcomes that may be of your decision. And then he gives Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas as an example of a wrong-headed piety, of a man that was very pious. So he said, we need to prevent Belmish sacrifice from being taken. We need to prevent chas v'chayila, a danger of people killing each other. But he didn't see that the right decision must have been, and I don't care right now if you would sacrifice or if you would kill Bar Kמצא. Both are acceptable. But not taking into account, or maybe just picking up a third option, but not taking into account the bigger picture, that is not piety, that is misplaced humbleness, and maybe even something that is worse. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas and his role in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And again, all of that was not chas v'chayila in order to smear someone that was certainly one of our chacham, one of our sages, but in order for us to learn from past mistakes, because he did not have Rabbi Zechariah Ben Avikulas before him to learn from his mistakes. So maybe he can be forgiven. But we that do see the mistakes that have been done in the past, we have no excuse to repeat them. Thank you. May we next year, Be'ezrat Hashem, have a shiur about Geula in the eve of Tisha B'Av.
So when we I'm